Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our sixth meeting or sixth lecture under the series of philosophy of science in economics, or what you may call philosophy of economics. If you recall, in our previous lecture, I did take you through the history and relevance of philosophy of science in economics. Unfortunately, the time that we had was too short, so we could not really discuss most of the relevant things. And that's why I'm back in this meeting, the sixth meeting, to try and continue with the discussion and probably be able to close that discussion, ladies and gentlemen. But if you recall, in that meeting that we had, I did tell you to go and read the book Conjunctures and Refutations by Karl Popper. I also told you to read the Philosophy of Methodology of Economics. I told you to go and read the Handbook of Economic Methodology. I told you to read the book Recent Developments in Economic Methodology. I also asked you to read the book Philosophy of Economics, an anthology, and that's a Cambridge University Press publication of 2007. I told you to read the Oxford Handbook of the Philosophy of Economics and the Dismal Queen of the Social Sciences in Fact and Fiction in Economics, dealing with realism, models, and social construction. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are able to go and read those books. And today we continue with the same subject of history and relevance of philosophy of science in economics. As if you recall very well, I told you that the discipline economics, and considering the various aspects that are covered in the area of economics, then makes us really believe that philosophical arguments and analysis are very central and very important. So it becomes very useful for us to start discussing issues of philosophy of science in economics, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if you recall, last time we were discussing issues of complexity. Economics is, of course, faced with complex situations, and those are the things that they discuss, and those are the things that they analyze, and of course, the models that they develop are also based on complexity issues, as you can see. So economics deals with a subject matter that is very complex, a subject matter that is hard to get under epistemic control, so the chances of error are considerable, ladies and gentlemen, and at the same time, the subject matter in economics is close to common sense experience and beliefs, but economic theory violates them into recognizable ways, and through its theoretical idealizations, and then through B, the correctness or corrections it suggests to make of common sense beliefs by replacing them with allegedly deeper but counterintuitive theories, ladies and gentlemen. I also told you, if you recall in the previous meeting, that this economics is an important source of controversy. And these sources of controversy include things like a chronic mismatch between expectations and actual performance in relation to whatever goals economics is supposed to pursue, ladies and gentlemen. So from that perspective then, the proper goals or appropriate ambition of economics are far from unambiguous. So there's a certain level of ambiguity that is created by economics because of the models that they develop. And I hope you still remember that. I told you very well that usually when they are trying to model the common sense expectations, experiences, and beliefs and so forth, right, they use theoretical idealizations, and of course through the corrections, those idealizations suggest to make of common sense beliefs by replacing them with those far deeper, complicated or complex models, ladies and gentlemen. So as a result, there's a certain level of ambiguity. So you cannot say that what is happening there cannot be considered ambiguous. So there's a school of thought that that has a feeling that economics introduces ambiguity in everything that they do. But anyway, some people, some scholars take it as an important task of economics to provide reliable predictions that will support its authoritative role in guiding economic policy. And that's why the policies that are developed, especially economic policies that are crafted by various governments and institutions, must be guided by, of course, research. And once that is done, then at the end of the day, you may come up with very good and useful insights into the policies that will certainly work. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, I've already told you that some people take it as an important task of economics to provide reliable predictions. So we want those predictions that are very, very reliable, that can support authoritative roles in guiding economic policy. Now, when you have a position and a situation of that nature, and yet you come up with a model that cannot be relied on, or maybe if you really take up some of those recommendations that are given through research that is done, then you lose interest at the end of the day, especially if you get disappointed. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, repeated predictive failures in economics have given rise to both what we call a ridicule among the critics, and then to more modest goal setting among the practitioners. So the modest goal setting aspect among the practitioners has also come to the fore, ladies and gentlemen. So in this case, you'll also see that as that aspect is taking place at one side of the continuum, on the other side of the continuum, whatever view is adopted about the ambitions of economics, there will always remain some room for the critic to be dissatisfied with its performance. So I know that a greater job and a good job has been done, but still critics will be there, ladies and gentlemen. And explicit controversy is typically prompted by what we call an actual or alleged failure by economics, which often at times of crisis fails to provide results. If an economy is at the center of a crisis, and then you get a pool of economists and they start modeling, and then they are devised, now that failure that comes as a result of utilizing that information will certainly prompt a group of people to be very, very, very critical, and also to lose interest in these things. And I'm sure you've seen this happening over time. You remember the financial crisis that we had a few years ago. You know the models that have been adjusted by international communities, etc., that disregard the behavioral component of individuals in an economy. For instance, let me just give you a very simple example. I know that economists, especially when they are trying to come up with models that can guide government, and here we are talking about evidence-based policies. So when they are recommending policies based on research, based on their data, etc., rarely do economists, for instance, include the aspect of politics in their models. And probably even the behaviors that come from these political aspects. So at the end of the day, yes, you have a model, but the model does not take into consideration certain things. And therefore, a politician can wake up one morning and say, well, I dreamt, I had a dream, and therefore this is what we should do in an economy. Or somebody will say, well, why don't we take up these 23 points or 25 points and implement them? Whereas you've come up with your own plan, probably which have been, these plans which have been developed by an authoritative body somewhere, maybe in a country like Uganda where you have the National Planning Authority, maybe the National Planning Authority has come up with a policy document that must guide the investments in the economy and of course various efforts, right? So those things are there, but a leader of a country, a leader of a sector may come up and say, no, this is what I see as very important and therefore we should probably implement these particular aspects, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why I'm telling you that explicit controversy is typically, I mean, especially in economics, is typically prompted by an actual or alleged failure by economics, often at times of a crisis in the economy itself, and under the pressure of criticism and skepticism, some economists set out to defend their discipline unfairly or unnecessarily. So on both sides of the argument, ladies and gentlemen, all right, those who critique and dismiss economics and those who certainly defend economics lying, and you have all those other fellows who are at the fence of the discussion. Whatever the case, ladies and gentlemen, on both sides, arguments often ascend to what we call meta-theoretical and philosophical heights. And that's why we must delve into philosophy of science, right? We must go into theory, right? And then look at claims about the proper methods that are employed and appropriate understanding of the nature of theory and of the goals of inquiry, and these become very essential. I remember one time when we were having a discussion, right, and we had some people who were undertaking research, and one was undertaking research in the area of economics, and the other one was undertaking research in the area of social sciences in general. And I remember the person who was undertaking research from the other general social science disciplines, psychology, marketing, economics. Now, these individuals do, for instance, combine theories. And they always tell you that, you know, in an attempt to explain reality out there, this theory does not seem to provide an adequate explanation of reality. And therefore, we bring in this other theory to explain what cannot be explained by the other theory. So combining two theories seem to be the order of the day and the norm of the day. Some people do it, other people don't like it, right? But I'll tell you, economists will tell you it is not logical, it doesn't make sense. There is no way you can combine theories to come up with an explanation. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is really very true, and that's their thinking. Theories cannot be combined. But in this case, we are saying that on both sides of the arguments that are presented, the arguments which are presented often ascend to what we call meta-theoretical and philosophical heights and become claims about proper methods and appropriate understanding of the nature of theory and of the goals of inquiry. And such debates, instigated by economic crisis, ladies and gentlemen, have understandably followed a somewhat cyclical pattern. And that's why we need to understand those things. So another possible source of philosophical reflection and debate in economics is the emergence of new theories or research techniques that challenge more established ways of doing things in economics, of doing research in economics, right? And I'll tell you, for example, what we call the methodenstrate of the 1880s was launched by Karl Menger's attempt. I hope you still remember that. And the objective was to create space and justification for his new marginalist theory in the German-speaking world. which was generally dominated by the historical school. Now, more recently, ladies and gentlemen, the initiatives of experimental, the initiatives of behavior, the initiatives of neuroeconomics have launched methodological debates and research, and with philosophical arguments which are designed and used either to justify the new approaches or to question those particular approaches, ladies and gentlemen. So during the 19th century and for the most part of the 20th century, ladies and gentlemen, philosophical and methodological arguments were designed. And these philosophical and methodological arguments which were designed, they were presented by thinkers who were also practitioners in economic inquiry. And not only were they practitioners, but many of them were among the leading economists of their time. Now, I can give you a list of these people, ladies and gentlemen, so that during your free time, you can actually go and read their works. These have included, for instance, Nasser's Senior. They have included John Stuart Mill, right? And I'm sure you know Stuart Mill very well. The other time when I was talking about theory of ethics, Stuart Mill also came up. Then you have things like Karl Marx. You remember Karl Marx? You remember Wilhelm Roscher? You remember William Stanley Jevons? You remember Karl Menger? You remember Alfred Marshall? When you begin talking about the Marshallian models, right? Then we have Vilfredo Pareto. Of course, he was an economist and at the same time sociologist in the 19th century. And I'm sure you are very familiar with Pareto's principle, 80-20 rule and so forth. He did a great job there. Then you have Frank Knight, you have Leo Robbins, you have Friedrich Hayek, you have Friedman, Milton Friedman. And in our next lecture or subsequent lecture, I'll be discussing Milton Friedman because he has contributed a lot and he has so many philosophical insights. And then you have Paul Samuelson. I'm sure you remember those particular books and, of course, publications that they have produced, ladies and gentlemen. So that's what it is that in the 19th century and the 20th century, those people have come to the fore. So at the same time, during this time, when these fellows came on the scene, you did not have any separate field for philosophical reflections on economics. No, they are not there. And of course, on certain occasions, our practitioners responded to the felt need for such a reflection, but this did not lead to a collective and cumulative research characteristics of a field of specialized inquiry, which we can actually call the philosophy of science in economics. So as you can see, yes, many scholars thought that maybe we should also have the philosophical thought and philosophical perspectives, but this was not really possible. So in this case, around this time, recognizable traditions were created. But there was little cumulative progress across generations concerning the details of the argument and arguments, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, this is very important. However, I should let you know, ladies and gentlemen, that this kind of thing that we have noted started changing in the late 1970s. And of course, the changes came to the fore as a field of specialization started taking shape. So in the 1970s, then these philosophical aspects came into this discipline called economics. So in the 1970s, specialized fields in economics were created. And therefore, we see, for instance, philosophy of economics as a discipline emerging. We see another discipline called economic methodology. And of course, these came up and the usual indicators of an institutionalized research field could soon be identified. Around that time, a number of specialists came to the fore to try and promote philosophy of economics and economic methodology. And then, of course, there was development of an intensive and extensive network of communication between those specialists and researchers. Then conferences and, of course, conference sessions focusing on shared research topics were also put up. And we also see growing number of publications, both books and journal articles in the discipline. And of course, the founding of special, what we call specialized journals now. If you go to the internet, for instance, you'll find, for instance, journals like the Journal of Economics and Philosophy. And this was around 1985. And the Journal of Economic Methodology in 1994, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see, all these things came up, research agendas were promoted, and of course you had a number of unraveled, if not unrivaled research taking place in this area. We also see a number of international organizations forming around this area. For instance, we see formalized international organizations like International Network for Economic Method, and you can call that INEM, and that has been in place since 1989. Then you have the International Graduate Program, for example, Erasmus Institute of Philosophy and Economics, what you can call EIPE, and that has been around since 1997, ladies and gentlemen. So with all these things that we are seeing, right, we see that these are all unmistakable indicators of an established field. Some books now exist, like the Handbook of Economic Methodology, which I've told you to go and read, the Oxford Handbook of Philosophy and Economics, and there are also so many other anthologies that jointly cover a great deal of ground in the expanding area, ladies and gentlemen. So, as researchers in this area, right, as students who are pursuing a PhD in energy economics, do not be led to think that philosophy of science does not apply to your discipline. No, it is very, very relevant, and therefore we need to really feel that sense of pride in ourselves in what we are doing. We are doing the right things. So the early stages of the field in the 1970s, ladies and gentlemen, and the early 1980s were largely shaped by a number of things, by an alliance with the history of economic thought, which was in itself experiencing what you may call a similar growth. And most participants had a background in economics rather than philosophy, as you can see. But of course, right now, we need to think about these aspects. Ladies and gentlemen, if you recall, at one stage, I told you to go and read a book, Conjectures and Refutations by Karl Popper. And I told you that before you come for this lecture, you should go through it, and I hope you have. Conjectures and Refutations. So, ladies and gentlemen, Karl Popper and Imre Lakatos were the authors whose ideas in the philosophy of science were consulted and put in use in addressing questions such as, are economic theories falsifiable or in general empirically testable? So if you have read the works of Lakatos and the works of Karl Popper, those questions will come to the fore. And those individuals I gave you, like Samuelson and so forth, who pioneered economics during the 19th century and the 20th century then, you discover at that material time that the question, right, that will come up or that comes up from economics, right, again derived from the works of Karl Popper, is that philosophy of science, right? Can philosophy of science be utilized to explain reality in economics? And what is reality in economics? And the second argument here is that can we use, for instance, philosophy of science, right, in addressing questions of economic nature? Like, can we, for instance, falsify economic theories, right? Are these economic theories, in general, empirically testable, right? And those are the issues that are very important. In fact, other questions and which we shall deal with and handle in the future will lead to laws in economics, right? I'm sure you've had economists making statements like the law of demand, the law of supply, right, holding things constant and so forth. So the question that has come to the fore over time is, are really those laws that were developed in economics really laws? Do they conform to the principles of what is generally referred to as laws? So those are things that we are going to discuss so that you understand what we are talking about, ladies and gentlemen. So that is very important, right? And we need to answer those questions, right? So if you're talking about the theories in a particular field in economics, we need to know progress as well in a particular area. And given that these other related questions had to be largely answered in the negative, the conclusion was drawn that the Popperian, that's Karl Popper, the Popperian and Lacatosian frameworks, right, strictly interpreted, had better be abandoned. So some economists said, no, we cannot really touch the works of Karl Popper. We cannot touch the works of Lactose. We can't, because at the end of the day, the Popperian frameworks and the Lacatosian frameworks do not really apply to economics when they are strictly analyzed, examined, and interpreted in that strict sense. We simply have to abandon these things. Ladies and gentlemen, whereas that was the position and has been the position over time, the situation in economics now is totally different. The situation in economics is totally different. Philosophy and methodology of economics has in many respects a much closer connection with the frontline philosophy of science. We've already seen that. It not only critically employs a larger range of up-to-date ideas and tools developed elsewhere in philosophy, but it also contributes to the rest of philosophy of science. So there's a feedback. You know, when you develop this discipline called philosophy of science in economics, right, or philosophy of economics, and you develop that discipline, at the end of the day, that discipline that has come up in economics gives feedback. It feeds back, right, to the original philosophy of science. So it contributes to the rest of philosophy of science as well, based on new ideas and results developed when examining economics, ladies and gentlemen. So while large parts of the work are still done, right? So we really credit researchers who have taken up this initiative, right? So while large parts of the work are still done, as history and methodology of economics by economists within economic departments, an increasing proportion is done within philosophy department, and that is done as contributions to the philosophy of science. So there is work that is done in the area of economics to contribute to philosophy. So there is work done in economics department in form of philosophy of economics, right, which feeds to philosophy, but there's also work done in the area of philosophy that feeds back to economics, ladies and gentlemen. So do not look at these two disciplines as two separate or disparate fields, but they feed into each other. So the topics and issues of inquiry in economics, they actually derive from the practice of economic research and debate, and they are always portrayed as disciplines that are very, very important and critical, and of course portrayed and resolved in an increasingly dependent on contemporary developments in the philosophy of science discipline, ladies and gentlemen. So what do we then have to say at this material time? I hope you are still following. In case you are not following, you can possibly pause a bit and reflect on the few things that you have covered and maybe ask a question as well, ladies and gentlemen. But we can say that the realisticness, right? We are talking about the reality now. So realistically, and of course, there are also those aspects which bring in the unrealistic perspective. So the unrealistic and the realistic assumptions, right, do tell us exactly what we need to do, right? Remember, I did tell you at some stage that economics is built around a number of assumptions, right? And you cannot do away with assumptions in economics. They are there, and they'll always be there. Even the modeling is based on those assumptions. So, those assumptions have been critiqued and dismissed by some scholars. Actually, some scholars think that these assumptions are unrealistic, while others, they say, no, the assumptions are realistic. So there's a debate. So either the realistic nature of those assumptions or the realistic nature of those assumptions, ladies and gentlemen, which are usually built in the models that seem to guide economic thought in economics, right? They are really very, very, very old. This is an old tradition, an old and central issue, and now the philosophical analysis of economic models is in close contact with the new work on models and modeling in the rest of the philosophy of science. So very soon, those things which have been interrogated that relate to assumptions certainly will take on a different pattern altogether. So issues of causation are central for understanding economic reasoning, and the systematic utilization of philosophical work on causation has started recently, ladies and gentlemen. So the newly launched analysis of economic explanation is connected to the ongoing philosophical work and on mechanisms and unification and contrastive questions that continuously come to the fore and must be addressed, ladies and gentlemen. So most of the contributions to the philosophy of economics addresses issues in the emerging subfields of economics, such as, for instance, experimental economics, and I've already talked about that. Another field is evolutionary economics. Another one is computational economics. Then you have institutional economics, right? And I hope you remember the pioneers of institutional economics. Then we have the behavioral economics, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, geographical economics, as well as neuroeconomics, ladies and gentlemen. So these are very important areas. Now, in these areas, the philosophical issues are fresh. The philosophical issues are hot. So these are areas, right, where scholars are using certain models. They're actually using philosophy to try and explain reality out there. So in those areas I've just given you, neuroeconomics, behavioral economics, institutional economics, geographical economics, all those kind of things, ladies and gentlemen, they provide philosophers the opportunity to watch closely and perhaps to intervene in what is happening. So as we can see here, among the available positions, we find Milton Friedman's alleged instrumentalism, which supposedly the position held by many practitioners. So, ladies and gentlemen, last time I did tell you to go and read the works of Friedman, right? Milton Friedman. Now, assuming, or in the unlikely event that you have not read Milton Friedman, we can actually have another discussion around this topic probably next time. But do not leave out that book. Now, you recall that in our first lecture, I gave you that book. And I also gave you the book by Adam Smith. I hope you still remember. And I also gave you another book on the theory of moral sentiments. And I hope you have read those books. Now, I'm just trying to remind you that you take up your responsibility of reading. So Friedman, Milton Friedman has also come up. And of course, he's always put on the other side with what they call instrumentalism, which is probably a position now that is held by many people who subscribe to that school of thought of Milton Friedman, ladies and gentlemen. But we can also say that other philosophers, maybe other practitioners, maybe not actually philosophers, but other practitioners, and probably, and those who think about philosophy in this case may find Popper and Lakatos' falsificationists' frameworks attractive, especially in their meta-theoretical rhetoric. So you have those on the instrumental aspect of Milton Friedman, and you have those who believe in the on the falsification perspective, and that's why you have people like Karl Popper, and you have those fellows who also ascribed in Lakatos' idea. So those ascribe to what we call meta-theoretical rhetoric. Now, as you can see here, variants of neo-Millian realism have been formulated by philosophers, and I'm sure you are very familiar with the works of Daniel Hosman, Nancy Cartwright, and of course a number of others. Now, critical, of course there's another gentleman called Mackey. He has done a lot of work in that area as well. They are called neo-Millian realism, and they have come to the fore. So again, that is very important. And then you have another field called critical realism, inspired by Roy Basker's work, which has also won some souls, just as in some other social sciences. So Basker's critical realism perspective is very important of philosophy, critical realism. There are also those, including some who pursue the rhetoric of inquiry project, who identify themselves as the proponents of relativism. There are also those who fall on the side of social construction, and they are proponents of social constructivism or postmodernism. So ladies and gentlemen, the lectures on philosophy of science, in this case, as I end this lecture, will be divided into two groups. And I want to prepare your mind so that as we delve deep into this subject matter, you know exactly where we are. So our lectures on the philosophy of science and economics will take two trends, perspectives, two parts actually. One part will be a series of lectures that will deal with the various philosophical issues characteristic of economics in general. That is from realism and Lakatos to explanations and testing. Then same time from modeling and mathematics to political ideology and feminist epistemology. I know that in economics we like modeling very much. We use formulas. So mathematics is applied to economics and so forth. So our philosophy of science will deal with that perspective, right, where we look at various philosophical issues which are characteristic of economics in general Realism, Lactose to Explanations and Testing. Please read their books, Modeling and Mathematics to Political Ideology. So that will be one category of lectures. Now the second category of lectures, ladies and gentlemen, will take the perspective of methods. We shall go into methods. We shall go into theories and branches of economics. So here we shall move systematically from forecasting and measurement to econometrics and experimentation, ladies and gentlemen. We shall also move from rational choice and agency issues to game theory. So when we start talking about rational choice theory, you know exactly what we are talking about. When you talk about agency issues and agency theory to game theory, you understand that very well. And then we shall also go to social choice. Now, in the second category, we shall also move from behavioral economics and public choice to geographical economics and evolutionary economics, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, the economics of scientific knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. So, as we can see in closing, ladies and gentlemen, the philosophy of economics is increasing in importance, and there's no question about that. First in society at large, right? And there's no way you can diminish the importance of philosophy of science in economics or philosophy of economics. So in society, it's gaining certainly that great importance that we know right from the economistic trends of marketization, commercialization, commodifications, and monetizations, etc., right? That's where we are coming from, and moving to the way we shape our culture and mental landscapes. And the discipline of economics relates to these processes both as a spectator and as a contributor, ladies and gentlemen. So the performance of economics in these roles calls for philosophical scrutiny. And second, science is part of the social world and thereby also subject to these very same trends. Meaning that naturalizing the philosophy of science by utilizing the resources of economics therefore seems very, very natural. It also is very, very credible and very reliable and credible kind of activity that must be undertaken in the area of economics in an open setting, and all these things that we have discussed, ladies and gentlemen, they call for philosophical approach and explanations, ladies and gentlemen. So philosophy of science is an important perspective in this area. As I close, ladies and gentlemen, in this lecture 6, or our 6th meeting, we have been discussing history and relevance of the philosophy of science in economics, and I've put a closing, or a full stop to that particular point now. In our series of lectures in philosophy of science in economics and philosophy of economics, we now know the history and relevance of the philosophy of science. Again, I just want to remind you, given where we are going, I want to refer you back to the books that I want you to read. Please go and read the book Conjunctures and Refutations by Karl Popper. I want you to go and read the philosophy and the methodology of economics, ladies and gentlemen. Also go and read the book that is published by Mackey, and that is the Handbook of Economic Methodology. Ladies and gentlemen, proceed and read the book called Philosophy of Economics, an anthology, and that is Cambridge University Press. Also read the book, the Oxford Handbook of the Philosophy of Economics. Do not forget also to read the book that is published, that is authored actually by Mackey, 2002, and that book is called The Dismal Queen of the Social Sciences. in fact, fiction, in fact and fiction in economics, deals with realism, models, and social construction. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for attending. Stay well, stay safe, enjoy your time. Until we meet in our next lecture, Lecture 7, I wish you a nice time. Bye.